Welcome back to Part B. We're with Scott Austin Martin with the ETX Stress Reduction Clinic. And we're going to continue our talk from Part A. If you haven't seen Part A yet, I recommend you go check it out. A lot of great information for men in mindfulness and being present and how to deal with trauma, past trauma, relational trauma, relationships, and just resources here in East Texas. So Scott, if you want to pick up where you left off.
Yeah, now you had mentioned in our Part A that you had mentioned masks. That was the key word that you'd kind of use. And that's a trigger word for me because there's a whole field of information when it comes to trauma and then defense mechanisms that actually create masks that have very specific characteristics that we can actually throw up on a whiteboard and become allies against the pattern, not necessarily being locked in our own rational stories about things. You had mentioned about, why don't you speak a little bit more about what you mean by mask, and we'll kind of go from there.
So the mask I'm referring to comes from this documentary called The Mask You Live In. It talks about the socialization of boys, how growing up in a society that really doesn't allow boys to nourish their emotional development. It teaches them to repress their emotions, their true, authentic expression. To give an example, I know when I was in Pee Wee football, if we got hurt and started crying, the response from the adults or the coaches was to suck it up, quit crying. Well, that's a natural human response to being hurt or injured. And so we're taught really early. That's just one small example. There's many, and it takes place in very subtle ways to kind of get reinforcement to get back in this, what we call the man box, to you got to act this certain way to really be seen as a man in society. So I think what I'm talking about is in those ways, we learn to put on masks to hide our true selves, or to maybe, like you were talking about in Part A, to live inside these stories that we've told ourselves and maybe that don't allow us to be present, that hinder us from the ability to express our true selves or our genuine emotions, or do so in a healthy way. And I know in Part A you talked about anger and control, and that's a big issue, especially in my field of violence prevention. I've been taught that anger is a secondary emotion. So we learn what triggers that anger. If we have a language and a way to identify what is really going on under the anger, I think it would work in a lot of ways to help benefit men from that being their initial response, to just react instead of respond, and so I think there's a lot of ways we could put on masks, not only from, not showing emotions, but maybe we put on masks to hide our insecurities. Maybe we put on masks to appear like we're really more masculine than we may feel we are. I think that we could explore that a lot.
Yeah, and I want to come at this from a couple different angles. One, I want to talk a little bit about generational trauma and how societal norms do actually create some big problems, but they also give us some opportunities in the future as well. When we look at conscious and subconscious, we used to kind of think of conscious and subconscious as like an iceberg, 20, 80, with a certain amount underneath the surface. Neuroscience in the last 5 to 10 years, we're actually learning that it's more like 1 to 1 million. All right. So when we look at, the actual amount of, like, there's approximately 11 million bits of data that we can take in any one moment. But if you get rid of long and short-term memory and different aspects of memory, then there's only 40, 50 bits of data that we're actually processing in any one given moment. So when we talk about touchstone memories and SAM scars, these things, there's a comparison that every orange that we now eat is compared to the very first orange that we've ever eaten. So there's a lot of things where the brain does what the brain expects to do. The Tetris effect kind of explains that. The Tetris effect is, I don't know if you remember the video game Tetris, it's 5 shapes that fall out of the sky and you got to move them a certain way to create a bar. Well, 27 students were paid 3 hours a day to play the Tetris game. And by the second day, they were having, daydreams of those shapes, you know, falling out of the sky, or they'd be, you know, walking across campus and they'd see a building in their mind. They'd be like, well, if I turn that building sideways, I wonder if I could fit it between that building and Liberty Hall.
Right,
It became detrimentally playing the game, even when they weren't playing the game. This is known as cognitive afterimage. This is the Tetris effect. So the brain does what the brain expects to do. We also talked about in part A, you know, doing presence. And so if you're lost in a story of suffering in an abstract reality, well, if you want to be really, really good at playing guitar, what do?
Practice.
If you want to be really good at playing tennis and have that amazing, you know, backhand muscle memory, what do? If you want to be really, really good at being present and not lost in a story of suffering, what do? You practice presence. This is the purpose of that. So when we look at conscious, subconscious, there's truly so many things that are just kind of on automatic pilot for a lot of different people, especially trauma triggers and defense mechanisms that are happening underneath the surface at a body level that we're over here in some other story, and all this other pain's going on in the body, and we're not even paying attention to it. So a part of our job is to begin bringing attention to it so that we're physically processing our reality from a different perception. Most people that are stuck and they keep hitting the same patterns over and over again, think of it like 2 dimensions, right? We're 2 dimensions stuck because these are the only perceptions that we're seeing reality in. A part of my job is to introduce people to a third or a multitude of new perceptions. And the moment that we go from 2D stuck to 3D, well, now we haven't moved, but there's suddenly a whole bunch of ways to flow through that we now feel that we never even knew were there before. And this is the value of introducing you how to process things somatically, because they're brand new ways at how we're processing information. If you're suffering, which is the first level of healing, it means I don't have enough information to escape suffering. Because if I did, I would, right?
Right,
so,
yeah, everyone would.
And so information and energy are the same thing. I don't have enough information. I don't have enough energy to escape suffering. So in order for me to escape suffering, well, the second level of healing is polarity. Polarity means I'm suffering here, but I'm not suffering here. Well, what is here? Is it a drug? Is it sex? Is it food? Is it something that's non-sustainable? Well, then this explains how we go from one to the other, and then we slam back into suffering. And many people just spend time between these 2 levels, with the third level being I'm stuck. And stuck means we keep coming back to the same place of stuck. But being in a place of suffering with no energy and being in a place of stuck with energy are 2 completely different things. They're 2 different places. And you cannot leave a place until you've allowed yourself to be there. And so if we got that whole veneer facade, it's not even allowing us to take a look at that. We're not even noticing these patterns, or we're not admitting it for sure. So now we're stuck. Well, now we have a choice. We can go internal or external. If we go external, there are some very effective coping mechanisms that we can go external that are not sustainable, but they're very effective short term. One of those is projection. Projection is, I'm so miserable inside, I've got to make it somebody else's fault so that I don't have to deal with it. Boom. Now we're not in suffering because now it's somebody else's fault, right?
Right.
Very quick, but we're going to destroy our relationships, right? Or we can do approach avoidance. Approach avoidance is, I'm not going to sit here with the stuff. I don't know about you, but when I get stuck, I get a little irritable. And so like now that we're irritable, we want to what? Move away from it. Well, my challenge is, instead of moving away from it, what if you went internal and you began processing the way the body is holding that story? And this is how we can, instead of using that energy to move away from something, which is what going to do? It's going to slam us back into suffering. It's like, no, I'm going to get out, and boom, it slams us right back in. Because what we resist persists. And we're an illusion that it even exists anyway with the mental health of stigma. So we want to be able to be with that in such a way that we can actually build up the energy and information about that. And there will be a point where that will burst us through to transformation of, enough of this. I know that I have power. I take back my power, and I'm going to take control and responsibility. And now we're moving towards resolution of choice of how we're actually controlling our lives. So polarity is a really, really big issue when it comes to relationships. I'm going to use these terms, and I have to do disclaimers, because I want to make sure that people, when we talk about gender, I mean, right now, you probably know the figure, there's like 60 something different ways that we can describe gender, right?
Right.
So, but for the majority of the population, we have like a bell curve, right? And so when I'm talking about gender, when I'm talking about characteristics, I'm not talking about actual gender. I'm talking about characteristics. Okay, so I want to make that disclaimer differential because nobody can tell you what you are, right? You're the one that decides that.
Right, right.
But for a large part of society, we have the bell curve with the outliers with homosexual and trans. We have literal wiring in utero that explains so much of that as well. And so nobody can tell you kind of what's your core. But when we talk about attraction to someone, normally for there to really be an attraction shows up in a lot of different ways. I'm talking about really that sexual chemistry kind of attraction. There normally has to be a polarity of some sort. Doesn't mean that we can't be great friends, but I'm talking about that attraction in a certain way. So I'm talking mostly about that part of the heterosexual aspect right now, right? And I want to make sure I make that big disclaimer because nobody can tell you who you are. But for the majority of men that are heterosexual, I would say that their core energy is what we would call masculine. Now, we both have access to both masculine and feminine characteristics. In fact, if I didn't have access to feminine characteristics, most women probably would not even talk to me. Like, we temper a lot of that in a lot of different ways. But it's helpful to take this metaphor and throw it up on a board and then become allies against the metaphor going, this is a way of looking at life and let me see where do I fit in that. And if it doesn't work for you, the first thing I want to tell you is throw the whole thing away and just look at a different metaphor. What I have found though in my practice is this is a very helpful metaphor for a lot of people. So when we look at that metaphor, I often bring up, and I don't have one here, but I'll bring up a battery and I'll show the battery to people and I ask, what are the two different sides? And I'll ask you the same question. What are the two different sides of a battery?
Male and female. Right?
Male and female, but what is the way that most people would describe that on a battery?
I'm drawing a blank right now.
Positive and negative?
Positive, negative. There you go.
I was setting you up and you didn't slam it for me. Okay. And unfortunately, this is a way a lot of our society looks at masculine and feminine energy.
You're right.
And nothing could be further from the truth. What I want to challenge is that one side gives and one side receives. One side gives, one side receives. So here's the metaphor that I'm going to lay out there. And remember, it's just a metaphor, right? Feminine energy is internal. Masculine energy is external. Okay? So what that means is that for a woman in internal energy, she has a womb, a nest, a field of influence that she naturally nurtures everything that's within that field of influence. Okay? Whereas by contrast, masculine energy is supposed to be the protector, the defender, the being present, not changing, always being here, external type of energy. So masculine energy serves feminine energy. And so if you're looking to power something, you got to take this little wire, connect it to that, come back, and you got to connect it. If we're looking at a battery, you've got to connect it to what? You got to connect it to her heart. So masculine energy protects feminine energy by connecting to her heart. How? Mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, financially, in all ways. Does that mean that he provides for her in all those things? No. In fact, modern day woman doesn't even need that. It means, and here's the metaphor, that the little girl hiding behind her heart trusts him in every single one of those categories. That's what it means. And
that's
so
deep.
If a man will serve a woman's heart, he will create power. Now, feminine energy is actually 10 times more powerful than masculine energy. Why? Well, somebody gives me sperm, I can't give you a baby back.
Right,
Okay?
exactly.
So feminine energy takes small things and makes them bigger. It grows, it creates. Masculine energy takes big things and isolates them so that you can protect and defend and conquer. Okay? And if masculine energy is serving feminine energy, then everything grows. It's a way that we use that protectiveness, right? So, but we have a world that's convinced women that they need to be men. And the reality here that's really quite humorous is that in my practice, this is my subjective analysis, people can disagree with me, women are better at being men than men are in a large part of our society. And there's a reason, there's a cycle that you can actually look at that explains a lot of this. And a part of it is, let's make sure that we describe defense mechanisms. So in polarity, let's say that you are a smoker. The very first time that you're smoking a cigarette, what would be a healthy signal from a healthy body?
Cough.
Exactly. You're putting smoke in your lungs. It's not good for you. Have a cough. So in order to become a smoker, you've got to override that signal. Normally it's going to be some egoic, like, ooh, don't I look cool? You know, so you got to override. So now instead of a coherent, healthy signal running through the autonomic nervous system, we have an incoherent signal, which is going to take more energy, right? And so the more energy we use, all disease is a lowering of vibration and frequency. The more of these incoherent signals that we have, the more that our life force is physically not able to, I don't know, even protect our immune system, to where now germs of opportunity can kind of take advantage of us in a lot of different ways. So when we look at polarity, you can see that once we flip something, it shifts the way that it's showing up in the body, and it's not even true or accurate anymore, right? So when we look at masculine and feminine energy, when a man, especially in his childhood, has been modeled toxic masculinity or defense, or he's been through a trauma that has crushed his spirit in some way, he will create a trauma. There will be a trauma of upregulation that creates a defense mechanism. And one of the things that that does is it flips the polarity in certain aspects of his life of masculine and feminine energy. So instead of being an external energy, he goes into internal energy. And so now in internal energy, he begins to experience physically, felt sense, something that I call the needy little boy syndrome. And so because he's in a state of need, because he is, right? He now is not going to attract very many authentic women in his life, right? And so he's not going to get what he wants. And so what he will do, what has occurred, that defense mechanism has created what we call a feminine mask, okay? That's locked into the felt sense of his autonomic nervous system until he does what? Heals the trauma, and those cycles of defense melt back into his authentic state of masculinity, where it takes no effort for you to be you, which means that that's our natural state of being, okay? And so now we've got this feminine mask and we're not getting what we want. So what will we do? Men will put a masculine mask on top of that. And even though we're in a state of need, we have learned that we can force, cajole, charm, manipulate to get what we need. And there's a lot of different varieties of this. Sometimes there's even somebody with a really good heart that's convinced themselves. What happens when we go into the needy little boy syndrome is we go into an abstract world of fantasy where we become the victim. And we may even have a story that we're the white knight as well, but now we've got this, but I'm worthy and I deserve something, and we're still gaslighting women in so many different ways. And men that aren't aware that they're even this pattern are completely in a story of illusion, and they don't even know how to approach this, but they're going to show up in their relationship in very, very key ways. And a man that is in feminine energy in some capacity is, if we look at the rules of attraction, is only going to attract a certain type of woman, which is a woman with a masculine mask that's showing up in very specific ways. So when the man has that feminine mask and then a masculine mask, that this narcissist, this is the definition of masculine toxicity right here. A needy little boy that's forcing his way to get what he wants. Okay. Can you think of any examples in our current political landscape highlight that on both sides? So let's take a look at the woman. So if a woman very early in her life learns that no one will protect her heart, then what is she forced to do?
Protect it herself.
So she has traumas that have created a defense mechanism. She's now in masculine energy. And quite honestly, she's better at being there than men are, right? But if you look at the two polarities, if suddenly instead of a female end, you've got a masculine end, then, not to be too crude, one gives, one receives. One has a penis, one has a vagina, right? If there's no longer a place to receive, then it's going to be pretty possible for that man to connect with the type of energy that she's going to really want, right? So she's going to, a very, very strong woman is going to be attracted to kind of a man that's weak in different areas, right? Now, it means he has no power. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have money, because there's just too many examples in our society where there's an incredible enabling that allows this to continue happening. Having money does not mean power. Having power means I'm in a state of flow, fully connected soul to soul to my best friend with an amazing relationship. That's what having power means. And I would encourage everyone to go, wow, that's what I really want. And to do the detective work, and then to go get the work done that actually says, you know what, it's okay that I'm not okay. And now I'm going to go look. So there's 3 different levels of consciousness in healing in every single one of these stages. The first one is, yeah, I'm aware that something in my childhood probably needs attention, but I'm going to go here and have this beer, or I'm going to go look at this video, or I'm going to distract. I'm going to use any number of coping mechanisms that are non-sustainable, that are not actually going to allow me to leave a place because I've never even touched it, right? So the second level of consciousness is acknowledgement. Moving from awareness to acknowledgement is huge, because that means, yeah, we're aware, but now we're going to look right at it. And in trauma work, what I do is I show people a myriad of ways of how to look at that as well, that's different than the way that they've been holding it. And the brain will begin doing what the brain expects to do as you train it. And the brain is incredibly neuroplastic. You know, it even in the 90s, we can shift a lot of things. The next level of consciousness from acknowledgement is acceptance. And honestly, there's a whole bunch of things that needs to happen, but normally we're talking about down-regulating the way the body is holding that story of trauma so that we can get to a place where we can come to resolution. Resolution meaning a choice about the way we're holding that story of, well, what if it was just okay that I had a crappy childhood? What would be the benefit to me if it was okay? Well, the benefit to me if it was okay is I would stop making it not okay. And if something I can't even change is not okay, then I'm physically using my life to resist an abstract story of the past that has nothing to do with the now. And I'm using all of my energy in my life. Well, is there any place in your life that you could use that energy? I don't know, like creating the life that you really want? For sure. So this becomes a detective work to figure out, how do I reclaim my power? How do I reclaim all those defensive mechanisms and move back into a state of flow where authentic masculine energy, if I'm a man in that scenario? I'm not saying that that's true for everyone across the spectrum. I'm saying that you decide what your core is. And if these symptoms show up a certain way, for men, it's going to show up in a way of, wow, I don't really feel like a man. I've never felt like a man. I've never felt like I was enough. And this is chronic in US culture. We have this concept of rugged individualism. And while that allows us to, be the Wild West in so many great ways, it also frequently creates, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not deserving. I'm not worthy. I'm not desired. It's almost every client that I deal with across the spectrum is just figuring out what flavor and what variety of that. And then what are the stories that they went through that convinced them of that. And then the body started holding, and then moving down through the layers to work with that in the body. So this is how I approach, helping people heal. On top of that, after we heal the traumas, then we can go into a whole bunch of strategies of, Gottman, the 4 horsemen, looking at, the sound marital house theory, and, ways that we can strategically input energy. We know what takes energy out of a relationship. How do you recover? Because you can go through almost anything if you got a consistent way to recover as well. Emotional focus couples therapy, it's fantastic, also very effective, but it's more about learning what are your attachment styles, and your attachment styles are frequently having to do with how you develop trauma. And so you can learn how to handle trauma and how to maneuver it, or you can go back and actually heal the trauma. And the body is dying to. There's a story about an impala and a leopard. That's a YouTube video that you can look at. And another therapy, TRE, trauma releasing exercise, the guy that invented that, and his name has escaped me at the moment, he shows that in his presentation, where the leopard has captured the impala, but it hasn't done the death kill yet. And so the impala, of course, has gone into freeze. And so it's barely even moving. You can't see it even breathing. So, there's hormones that have been released that allow it to, number one, disconnect from its central nervous system in a certain way so that it can surrender its spirit and die. That's Mother Nature's way of helping us out, right? So this leopard has done this in baboon country. And so these baboons are coming out of the trees going, hey, what's going on? Because they're territorial. They don't want this leopard in their territory. So now the leopard has a decision to make. Does it bug out, or does it, fight full-grown baboons? It decides to bug out. So the YouTube guy, he's all over the place, and he comes back to that impala. And then after like a minute, 2 minutes, all of a sudden you see that belly go, and then after another minute or two, somehow the impala makes its way up into a seated position, and it just begins shaking violently. And then it kind of gets up, wobbles up, kind of shakes things off, and it scampers off into the safari. So this is just a very quick rendition when you don't have an advanced prefrontal cortex with advanced memory, advanced imagination, belief system, culture that tells us what is okay and what is not okay. Right. The body is designed to unwind from the neural system of trauma very, very rapidly and quickly, right? The only time you're going to see animals that don't have an advanced prefrontal cortex that experience anxiety and things like that is when they're domesticated by human beings, you know?
Yeah.
God bless them, you know, our dogs, our cats, you know? So,
Yes.
so yeah, I would say get curious, because the moment that you get more information, information equals energy. Energy means that I now possibly know a way to get out of the suffering that I'm actually in. And what I want to make sure everybody knows is possible is that we are designed for a state of flow. And it doesn't take 15 years or 15 generations. It can take 15 minutes if it's set up the right way. And then you just systematically start working. And there's only so many issues. So there's a point where we're just physically cleaning the glass. And there's a way that you approach that. There's a way that you're gentle with that as well. And there, you need to work with somebody that understands that when you pop that top off of trauma, sometimes there are very big, heavy pieces with sharp edges that are kind of floating around. So there's a lot of prep for doing what you need to do. But my gosh, it's so worth it. It's so worth it. And it's possible. We have the mental health technology to eradicate, except for the most aspects of organic deficiencies. We have the technology to eradicate mental health issues. I'm going to say that, I'm going to state it. You heard it here. We have that technology. And we even have a lot of things that we could do that could get rid of it. For example, schizophrenia. 1% of the population has schizophrenia. This is a lot of our homeless as well. Okay, well, if you're familiar in schizophrenia, you have the alleles in your genetic structure. For schizophrenia, there's normally some trauma, 16, 17, 18, ish, that basically triggers, and now we're off to the races with that particular aspect of epigenetics. So what if we went back, for example, between 2 and 7, well, in utero and 2, we're in a dominant brain activity that we know as delta, right? So for you and I, this would be like deep sleep. Between 2 and 7, 2 and 8, a dominant brain activity is theta. So for you and I, this would be kind of like twilight reverie, so like a half dream, half awake. This is why this is such a magical time for kids. It's fantasy and fairy tale and all these other things. It's also a time period that they can download 4 or 5 languages just by absorbing it as well, right?
Yes, sponges.
So if you, in my industry, if you look at what was modeled to children during that time period, and then they're developing their felt sense of identity, that is a subconscious core of who they feel they are. And if we develop a defense mechanism based off of modeling or an actual experience, and we don't process that, we carry that. And if you look at what people, are modeled during that time period, and then you look at what they struggle and suffer with in the rest of their life, you will see these amazing correlations of data. Now, correlation is not causation, but I would say there's enough of something there to be, there's a very fruitful exercise of detective work on that particular part of our lives as well. And then right after that, we get puberty, and then, layers of, relationship complications where we're now, and what I would say about what we talked about with polarity is, I would say that your spouse, your mate, gives you the absolute best chance at healing your childhood or past emotional mental wounds. And the way that they do that is they trigger every single one of those wounds. And so there is literally a complementary wound of attraction. We are drawn to those people because it will create at some point a pain that will that will tell you what needs to be healed. Pain is a guide, but only always. It contains wisdom that will show you what needs to be healed. So if you then move away from that, and I'm not advocating for any situation where somebody's being abused, for sure. But I would say that there are very specific patterns where we are actually drawn to the same types of relationships over and over again because it will show us what we need to heal. One of those examples would be if you go through some form of emotional abandonment as a child, guess what you're going to attract in a relationship? But only always. At some point, there's going to be some variety of that, or you're going to perceive it that way because it's something that needs to be healed. It's almost as if the universe, now I don't have the clinical data to back up that claim. I've just seen it so many times. It's really, really obvious when you start doing it. It's like amazing aha moments for so many people. I've seen that particular pattern play out in different ways. So anyway, I told you I could literally keep talking about this stuff for 4 hours. It's one of my most passionate subjects as well. Get curious. Get
It's
curious.
great. I think curiosity and knowledge and information, like you said, is something we really need to have. And I've read that before too. We attract what we need to heal. And so that's a great point you bring up. And a lot of people do, we do see people who have been abuse victims revisit abuse in different relationships multiple times before they finally find a healthy relationship. And so all of your information today has been great. I really appreciate you taking time to talk to me. And this new initiative I decided to start, for East Texas men to get help, find support for their mental health, their physical health, just overall well-being, ways to promote healthy masculinity, ways to support each other in the East Texas community, just a place for men to come and speak about their issues, find ways to get help and avenues for resources and everything like that. And Scott, I just really, really appreciate you taking time today to talk to us. And all of the work you do is very important. It's very much needed in society and in East Texas. And we just appreciate your help.
It is needed. And there's so much need right now. It's kind of insane. I would advise, there's a pattern that I want to kind of mention. I mentioned this in the talk we did for the Mindfulness Triathlon also. Smith County, we had a really important piece of data that came out a couple of years ago that said of the 20 most populous counties in Texas, that Smith County was leading the pack in our suicide rate. And that means that there's a lot of people that are suffering. That means there's a lot of people without information or without the energy to escape suffering as well. And what I want to do is speaking to those people and people that are anywhere on the plateau of this particular journey. If you've been in the pit of pain and suffering, if you've been in the pit, that means that you have an experiential wisdom of that pit of pain. And if you can listen to what we're saying is possible and get curious and, physician, heal thyself. If you can heal what's here for you and escape that pit, or even better, I'm saying melt it, melt those defensive, patterns back into your authentic state, then that means that you're a guide. And, I am a 51-year-old white male. The chances that I'm going to say or do something the wrong way, it's not really if, it's a matter of when,
Right.
and I know that, and I really would not want to do that. But at the same time, I probably trip over myself at some point. If you're a woman, if you're another nationality, if you're a different gender, if you're a different race, to wherever you are within, your voice matters. And for you to share your journey, vulnerability is the great connector. Vulnerability, because what we do is we normalize this, it's okay to not be okay. If we can normalize that together and make sure that we've got enough voices that represent who you are out there listening to this. And if you haven't seen yourself being represented in a lot of this conversation, then maybe you're it. Let us help you figure out how to do this. And then you become the voice. You become the help. You don't have to be an LPC. You don't have to, you look at what you've been doing already, Jeremy, for so long. And I have such an immense amount of respect for the help and the resources that you provide to this particular county, to Texas. You can help just by having conversations, sharing your pain, looking for resources, showing other people how to find the resources, and keeping the conversation going so we make it okay to not be okay, because flow is something that our entire society can actually move forward. We have created social norms that say that's not true, and we've created social norms that masculine toxicity is okay, and it's not. We need to use the power of social norms, which if you go look at the clinical studies and what it does, it's hugely powerful, right? We need to move that needle in a completely different direction, and everyone listening can be a part of that. And we thank you for being so.
Yes. Thank you for everyone listening. Follow our page, East Texas Men, follow East Texas Stress Reduction. Join the conversation, and let's help create a healthier society.
Take care, guys.